When Rowan called, his voice sounded like a ghost from another time, familiar, yet strangely hollow. It had been years since college, years since we last sat across from each other laughing over cheap pizza and late-night promises that neither of us kept. He said he was coming through town just for a few days and needed a place to crash. "I'm tired, Cade," he said quietly, like the words had weight. "I just need somewhere still for a while." Something in me stirred, nostalgia, maybe, or that old unspoken pull I'd learned to silence. I told him, of course, he could stay here, that the guest room was clean. When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the dark window. For reasons I couldn't name, I was nervous. Jamie noticed right away. "That Rowan?" he asked, glancing up from the couch, phone in hand. I nodded. His jaw flexed slightly, that small, unreadable expression he wore whenever he didn't like what he was hearing, but refused to admit it. "When's he coming?" "Tomorrow evening." He hummed, eyes going back to his phone. All right. We didn't talk about it after that. Jamie and I had been together for 2 years, long enough to know how to step around each other's silences. Things between us weren't bad exactly, just dimmer, quieter. Some days, I couldn't tell if it was comfort or distance keeping us together. When Rowan arrived, it was raining, one of those thin, silver rains that blur everything just enough to make the world look softer. I opened the door, and there he was, standing under the porch light with small duffel and tired eyes. His hair was longer now, his face sharper, but his smile, that half-crooked grin, was the same. "Hey, man," he said, dropping the bag and stepping into the warmth. His voice was rough, but it carried a spark I hadn't realized I missed. I pulled him into a quick hug. "It's been forever." "Too long," he murmured. "You haven't changed a bit." That wasn't true. I'd learned how to hide myself better. Jamie appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel. "Rowan, right? Nice to finally meet you." "Yeah," Rowan said with an easy grin. "You're the one who finally convinced this guy to settle down?" Jamie smiled politely, though his eyes didn't quite match it. Something like that. Dinner was simple. Pasta, wine, conversation that filled the space between the cling of cutlery and the low hum of the rain outside. Rowan talked about his work, how he'd been traveling, and how lately he'd been feeling burned out. "I just needed a break," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Things have been heavy." "Work heavy?" Jamie asked. Rowan hesitated. "And other things. Eli and I split last month." The name hung in the air like smoke. I'd met Eli once years ago, the kind of man who filled a room effortlessly. I remembered thinking how good they looked together, and how that thought stung for reasons I never examined. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. Rowan shrugged. "Don't be. It was coming. I think I just stayed too long hoping it would fix itself." Jamie gave a small, sympathetic nod, then excused himself to take a call in the next room. The silence that followed was strangely intimate, heavy in the way only old familiarity can be. Rowan looked around the living room, his eyes tracing the framed photos on the wall. Jamie and I at the beach, my parents, a few of my paintings. "You've built a life here," he said softly. "It suits you." "I guess so." "You sound unsure." I smiled faintly. "I think I just forgot what sure feels like." He studied me. That same thoughtful expression I remembered from years ago, the one that used to make me feel seen maybe too much. "You always were the kind of person who carried things quietly," he said. I didn't respond. Later, after dishes were washed and the rain slowed, I showed him to the guest room. He dropped his bag by the bed and turned to me. "Thanks, Cade, for letting me stay. I know it's last minute." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "It's just a few days." He smiled, tired but genuine. "Still, it means more than you think." When I left him to rest, I lingered in the hallway longer than I should have. Through the half-closed door, I could see him sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples like the weight of the past few months was finally catching up. He looked fragile, not weak, but human in a way that made my chest tighten. Jamie was waiting in our room, already under the covers, scrolling through his phone. "He seems nice," he said without looking up. "He is." He set the phone down. "Just don't forget we're not running a hotel." I frowned. It's 3 days, Jamie. He sighed, closing his eyes. Yeah, 3 days. I turned off the lamp and lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped, but I could still hear water dripping from the gutters, slow and steady. My mind wandered to Rowan's voice, the look in his eyes when he said he was tired, the faint tremor in his smile. Somewhere between thought and sleep, I remembered the night years ago when he told me he'd met someone, the lie. I congratulated him, smiling too wide, pretending not to feel the small crack inside me. That crack had never fully closed. In the darkness, Jamie shifted closer, his arm brushing against mine. The gesture should have comforted me, but all I felt was distance disguised as closeness. I closed my eyes and listened to the rhythm of his breathing, steady, indifferent. From down the hall, I heard a faint creak. Rowan moving in the guest room, maybe turning in his sleep. I imagined him there, surrounded by quiet, the same quiet that filled my own chest. It was strange how someone could leave your life for years and return like no time had passed. And stranger still, how one even could remind you that you'd never really let them go. When I finally drifted asleep, a thought lingered, soft and unsettling. He came here because he was tired. But something told me that by the time he left, I'd be the one who couldn't rest. The morning arrived wrapped in the pale hush of overcast light. When I walked into the kitchen, Rowan was already there, barefoot hair messy, flipping pancakes like he used to in college. The smell of butter and coffee filled the air, and for a brief moment, it almost felt like we'd gone back in time. Two friends in a small apartment with nowhere else to be. Morning, I said, voice rough from sleep. He looked up and smiled. Didn't think you'd still be a late sleeper. I'm not, I lied, reaching for a mug. You just beat me today. Jamie walked in a few minutes later. Ty already nodded, briefcase in hand. Smells good, he said, though his tone was distant. Rowan offered him a plate, but he declined with a quick shake of the head. I've got an early meeting. He kissed my cheek mechanically, then muttered, Don't be late tonight. Before leaving, the door clicked shut, and the silence he left behind was almost too sharp. Rowan watched me, spatula in hand. He doesn't like me much, huh? It's not that, I said quickly. He just doesn't know you. Rowan chuckled, a soft, self-aware sound. I can feel when someone wants me gone, Cade. It's fine. We ate breakfast quietly, the kind of quiet that feels easy until you notice how it fills every corner. When I looked at him, I saw the exhaustion in his face, the kind that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much for too long. After we cleaned up, he asked, Want to walk? Clear our heads. The park was a few blocks away, wrapped in autumn gold. The air smelled of wet leaves and something nostalgic. We walked side by side, not touching, not talking much, just listening to the shuffle of gravel beneath our shoes. I forgot what quiet feels like, Rowan said after a while. Eli hated silence. He always needed noise, music, talking, anything to drown out the stillness. Some people can't handle hearing their own thoughts, I said. He glanced at me, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. You always said that. Did I? He nodded. You said it the night before graduation. You told me I was scared of being alone with myself. I laughed softly. Guess I wasn't wrong. We stopped by the lake, the surface rippling with the reflection of a gray sky. Rowan tossed a pebble into the water and watched the circles spread. I stayed with him too long, Cade. I kept thinking love would come back if I just tried harder. But sometimes, trying harder just digs a hole deeper. There was something raw in his voice, and I wanted to say something comforting, something that didn't sound like pity. Maybe love doesn't vanish, I said. Maybe it just changes shape, until we don't recognize it anymore. He looked at me then, really looked. You ever feel that way? I hesitated. Sometimes. He didn't press, and I didn't explain. We walked back in silence. By the time we reached the house, the air between us felt heavier, charged with things unspoken. Later that afternoon, I painted while he sat nearby reading, the radio playing faintly in the background. It was a small, ordinary scene, but I felt an unfamiliar ease in it, like the house had finally exhaled. When Rowan spoke, His voice startled me. "You still paint like you're remembering something," he said. "Maybe I am." He stood behind me, close enough that I could feel his breath when he said, "I used to think you painted to escape." I set the brush down slowly. Maybe both can be true. The air shifted then, subtle but undeniable. I turned to find him watching me, eyes soft but unreadable. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled faintly, breaking whatever had started to build. "You've gotten better." I forced a small smile back. "You haven't changed either." He laughed under his breath. "That's not true." By evening, Jamie still hadn't texted. It was nearly 8 when he finally called, saying he'd be late, that work had kept him longer than expected. I told him it was fine, though I wasn't sure I meant it. Rowan was on the couch, scrolling through his phone when I joined him. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, sitting down beside him. "Just same old." He studied me for a moment, then said quietly, "You don't have to pretend things are perfect." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, choosing his words carefully, "you look at him the same way I used to look at Eli, like you're waiting for something that never comes." The words landed with quiet precision. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. The movie we put on played mostly to silence. Occasionally, he'd laugh softly at a scene, and I'd find myself watching him instead of the screen. Every small gesture, the way he leaned back, the way his hand brushed the couch cushion between us, pulled me somewhere I shouldn't go. When the credits rolled, I stood up quickly. I should check if Jamie needs a ride. Rowan nodded, not looking at me. "Of course." I called Jamie, but he didn't answer. Just a hollow ring, then voicemail. When I turned around, Rowan was at the window, looking out at the quiet street. "Do you ever wish," he said softly, "that life didn't have to be so complicated?" "All the time." He turned to face me, his expression unreadable but gentle. "You were always the one thing that felt simple." My heart stuttered. The air between us grew still, stretched thin by what neither of us dared to say. I opened my mouth, searching for something, anything, that could break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. Then, mercifully, the sound of Jamie's car pulling into the driveway shattered it. I stepped back instinctively, like I'd been caught in something invisible. Rowan exhaled, shoulders dropping. Jamie walked in moments later, exhausted, loosening his tie. He glanced at Rowan, then at me. "You two look serious." "Just talking," I said too quickly. Jamie's eyes lingered on me a second too long before he muttered, "I'm going to shower." When he disappeared down the hall, Rowan gave me a small, apologetic smile. "I should probably get some sleep." I nodded. "Yeah, long day." As he passed me, his shoulder brushed mine, light, accidental, but enough to make something in my chest shift painfully. That night, as I lay beside Jamie, listening to the sound of the shower running, I stared at the ceiling, trying to untangle the mess inside me. Rowan's words replayed in my mind, quiet but insistent. "You were always the one thing that felt simple." But nothing about this felt simple now. It felt like standing on the edge of something I wasn't ready to admit existed. Something dangerous, something inevitable. In the dark, I heard the water stop, then the bathroom door open. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep, but all I could see behind my eyelids was Rowan's face at the window, reflected in the soft gray of the evening light. The morning broke with the sound of rain tapping lightly against the windows, a steady rhythm that filled the silence between breaths. Jamie had already left for a work trip. He'd mentioned it the night before in passing, half distracted, like everything else lately. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker, when Rowan walked in, hair tousled, wearing one of my old hoodies. It hung loosely on him, and for a second, the sight of it made something inside me falter. "Guess it's just us today," he said, voice low, almost tentative. "Yeah," I replied, my tone quieter than I meant it to be. The house felt different without Jamie's presence. Quieter, freer, but also more dangerous. The kind of quiet that dares you to fill it with something you'll regret later. Rowan poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, watching the rain through the window. "It's strange," he said. "When I was younger, rain always made me restless. Now it just feels like permission to stop pretending. I looked at him, curious. Pretending what? He smiled faintly. That everything's fine when it isn't. For a while, we just sat there, drinking in silence. The soft patter of rain felt almost intimate, like it was sealing us inside some suspended moment that didn't belong to the rest of the world. Around noon, we moved to the living room. I pulled out a few unfinished canvases, and Rowan offered to keep me company. He sat cross-legged on the rug while I mixed paint. "You still do that thing," he said, "where you don't talk while you're thinking." "Oh, habit," I said. "Some habits are worth keeping." His voice was steady, but I could sense something deeper beneath it. A careful restraint, as if he were afraid of saying too much. I dipped the brush in color, then hesitated. "Why did you really come here, Rowan?" He looked up sharply, then laughed softly like he'd been caught. "I told you, I needed a break." "From what? From Eli? From yourself?" He leaned back against the couch, exhaling. "From both, maybe." After a pause, he added, "You ever have a moment where you realize you don't recognize your own life anymore?" I nodded slowly. "Every day lately." He smiled without humor. "Then maybe we're both lost." I kept painting, though my hand trembled slightly. The image forming on the canvas was abstract, shades of gray and blue bleeding into each other, uncertain where one ended and the other began. It looked like rain trying to become sky. When I finally looked up, Rowan was watching me with a softness that made my chest tighten. "You've always had this stillness," he said quietly, "even when everything around you was falling apart." I set the brush down. "Stillness isn't always peace." He nodded. "I know." The rain grew heavier, drumming against the glass. The light in the room dimmed, turning everything a shade duller, gentler. Rowan shifted closer, as if drawn by something he couldn't resist. I didn't move away. "Do you remember," he said, "that night after finals? We stayed up till sunrise talking about what our lives would look like." "Yeah," I said. "You said you wanted to build something that lasted." He smiled faintly. "I didn't think it would be so hard just to build myself." There was a long pause. Then, almost under his breath, he added, "I didn't just miss my old friend, Cade. I missed you." The words hung there, fragile and dangerous. I felt them settle into the air, felt them crawl under my skin. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. "Rowan." "I know," he said quickly, looking away. "You don't have to say anything." But I did. Or maybe I didn't. I wasn't sure. All I knew was that something inside me had shifted, something I had been pretending not to feel for years. The rain outside became a steady roar. I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the blurred world beyond the glass. "You shouldn't say things like that," I whispered. "Why not?" "Because it makes things harder." He rose slowly, his reflection merging with mine in the window pane. "Harder for who?" I turned to face him. The space between us felt thin, electric. Every breath, every heartbeat seemed amplified. For a moment, I thought he might reach for me. I don't know if I wanted him to, or if I was terrified that he would. Instead, he took a step back. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did." I interrupted, more softly than I expected. "You meant it." He nodded once, his eyes glinting with something between guilt and longing. "Yeah," he whispered. "I did." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything we couldn't say. Hours passed without either of us mentioning it again. We ate quietly, cleaned up, moved through the house like ghosts orbiting a truth we were afraid to touch. The rain never stopped. Later that night, Jamie called. I hesitated before answering. "Hey," he said, his voice distant, distracted. "Just checking in. How's everything there?" "Fine," I said too quickly. "Just painting. Watching a movie." He didn't notice the lie. Or maybe he didn't care enough to. "Good," he said. "I'll be back late tomorrow. Don't wait up." When I hung up, I realized Rowan was standing in the doorway. He'd heard enough to understand. His eyes were unreadable. "You don't have to keep pretending," he said quietly. "Pretending what?" "That you're happy." I swallowed hard. "You don't know what I am." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of rain and coffee on his clothes. I know what it looks like when someone's trying to convince themselves. Something broke in me then, softly, silently, but undeniably. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I let the quiet stretch between us. I didn't move. Neither did he. We just stood there, breathing the same heavy air, trapped between what we wanted and what we couldn't have. Then, as if sensing the danger, Rowan stepped back. "I should go to bed," he said, voice rough. "Yeah." I whispered, "Good night." He hesitated before leaving, his hand brushing against my arm as he passed. It was a fleeting touch, but it carried everything we hadn't said, the ache, the restraint, the impossible truth of what lingered between us. When he disappeared down the hall, I sank into the couch, staring at the rain-soaked window. My reflection stared back, blurred and uncertain. Somewhere deep inside, I understood what this was turning into, even if I didn't want to name it yet. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something quieter, something born of exhaustion and need, a hunger for understanding, for being seen. But whatever it was dangerous. And as the night deepened, I realized the betrayal had already begun, not with actions, but with silence. The morning after felt heavier than any hangover I'd ever had, and yet there'd been no alcohol, just words, tension, and everything we'd both been too afraid to say for years. I woke up to the sound of the rain, soft and persistent. Hitting the window like a metronome marking time, I wished I could slow down. The space beside me was empty. The couch was cold where Mason had been, the blanket still crumpled in the same careless way he always left it. For a moment, I thought maybe last night hadn't happened. Maybe he hadn't looked at me that way, hadn't said those things that made the air between us thick and almost unbearable. But when I found the note on the counter, scribbled on a torn piece of notebook paper, his handwriting slanted and rushed, I knew it had to clear my head. "Be back soon. Don't wait up." My chest tightened as I read it again and again. It wasn't goodbye, but it wasn't a promise either. Mason had always been like that, never fully here, never fully gone. I sat there for a long time, replaying every word we'd exchanged, every glance, every silence that said more than our conversations ever could. I wanted to be angry that he left, angry that he'd opened the door to something between us only to walk away when it mattered most. But mostly I felt afraid that maybe he'd realize it was all a mistake. Hours passed before I heard his car pull up outside. I didn't move from the couch. The front door creaked, and I felt him hesitate in the doorway, as if he wasn't sure he was welcome back. "You didn't go to work," he said softly, stepping closer. I shook my head. Didn't feel like it. He stood there, dripping from the rain, his hoodie clinging to him. His eyes met mine, tired, uncertain, but softer than before. "I just drove. I didn't even know where I was going," he murmured. "I needed to think." "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. He took a breath, and in that moment, I saw the weight of years behind it. "About us. About what last night meant. I've been trying to ignore it for so long, but I can't anymore. You're not just my friend, Noah. You never were." The sound of his voice saying my name like that, so careful, so deliberate, made something inside me unravel. I wanted to close the distance, to tell him I felt the same, that I'd been holding it back just like him. But I couldn't ignore the ache that came with it. The betrayal of knowing he'd been with someone else not so long ago, pretending I was just a safe place to fall back on. "You can't keep doing this, Mason," I said quietly, coming close and then pulling away, saying things that make me hope, and then disappearing when it gets real. His face fell, and for once, he didn't argue. "I know," he whispered. "I know I've messed this up. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. But being here with you, it just made everything worse." Worse. I asked, the word sharp in my throat. "Because I can't be near you without wanting more," he said, voice cracking slightly. And I hate myself for how long it took me to admit that. Silence filled the room, heavy but not empty. I could feel the shift in him, like he was finally done running. When he took a hesitant step forward, I didn't move away this time. The air between us was charged, the kind of stillness that comes before something irreversible. I don't know where we go from here, he said, his voice breaking the quiet. Maybe we don't need to know. I replied, maybe it's enough to just stop pretending. Mason's hand brushed mine, tentative but real. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet, trembling, and painfully human. His thumb lingered against my skin, and I felt all the anger, confusion, and longing blur into something gentler, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. For the first time, I saw him not as the boy I used to know, but as the man standing in front of me, flawed, scared, but honest. And somehow, that honesty felt like the beginning of something, even if it came from the ruins of what we were. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. You already did, I said softly. But maybe this time we can find each other differently. He nodded, eyes glistening in the pale morning light. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a kind of calm that felt almost foreign. I didn't know if we'd make it through this, or what tomorrow would look like. But for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like the end. When he leaned in, his forehead resting against mine, it wasn't confession or promise. It was something in between, something fragile and real. And in that stillness, I realized the story between us wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about survival, about finding love in places we least expected it, even when it hurt, even when it broke us first. As the sun broke through the clouds outside, I felt the warmth spill into the room, soft and golden. Mason's hand was still in mine, steady now. For the first time, neither of us looked away. Whatever came next, it would be ours to face. No more running, no more pretending. Just truth, raw and unfinished, waiting for us to finally live it.